session agenda is the HRC geothermal test project. I think you guys are up.
You'd like to just introduce them briefly?
That would be great.
Yeah, so Chris Petrie and I have talked multiple times, met with Excel as well at a meeting, and we really felt like after learning a little bit about this geothermal project proposal that it was time to kind of bring this forward to you folks, to the commissioners, because, well, in the past, commissioners have been interested in green energy type projects and put a fair amount of effort into that. And this is maybe different than some of those, but it was potentially a local opportunity that was presented. And it also could help augment funds to be able to acquire county forest land down the road as well. So if this all came together. And so at this point, we're pretty early in evaluation of this project, but thought it would be a great time to have them give you an introduction. So this is Chris Petrie with GeoX, and I'll let him introduce this other person here. And we'll go from there.
I'm the senior lineman, like I said, we have identified an area in Hood River County that we see potential for a geothermal plant. And with me is Greg Suchek. He is our chief technology officer.
Nice to meet you all. Thanks very much. Again, this is an introduction. That's how I'm treating it, as an introduction. So please feel free that towards the end, I'm going to be quite brief, try to do it in 10 minutes and then give you time to ask some questions. But basically, the presentation that we have for you, and it looks like we have the same problem here.
But we've got it here.
Thank you. Okay. Basically, the focus that we have and is that we really want to generate 24/7 type sustainable energy and power systems as a company. So what we have planned, or would like to have planned for Oregon in the Hood area, is the plants that we would set up. These are geothermal power plants. They're supercritical power plants. We go after high temperature, 800 degrees Fahrenheit plus temperatures. So it's a significantly different departure from what we currently do in geothermal today. But to do that, it has a significant value in what we target, and that is a minimal footprint. We can get by with a few wells versus what people take 30 wells to get. And I'll explain a little bit of that going forwards. So the purpose is to construct a geothermal energy plant, target deep geothermal resources, and develop a 50 to 60 megawatt. They're customizable. We can scale that from 50 to 60 to 100, 200 megawatts. So it's really scalable up from there if we choose to, or even lower. Next slide is why Hood River County. And our geologists, geophysicists have reviewed the area in terms of existing temperature data, in geophysical data that supports that we could see these types of temperatures that I described. And that's critical to our processes because we are bringing back pure steam. We're not bringing back hot water. We're not bringing back any kind of liquids from a resource that's down 13, 20,000 feet deep. When I say 13 to 20,000 feet deep is because we don't know right now where that temperature exists. So for this project to really get kicked off, we need your help and support in doing an exploration program to assess the heat and the thermal gradients deeper. So that would be a number of wells to assess that this temperature is going to exist at depth with greater confidence so that we can set up the power plant as we would like. So the area of interest highlighted here in this box, it's a proximity to Mount Hood. It's one of the reasons it was selected is it's also close to transmission lines, which allows us quick access to get the power to the end users. And I'm not going to say who the end users are right now. That would be something that we work together with you guys on determining what that looks like. We again defined the geothermal resource in Sacramento County. Apologize if I didn't say that correctly. It's approximately $150 million investment by us to do this. and obviously would generate significant tax revenue for the county. Obviously indirect and direct labor and support. It's a 25-year project in terms of the power plant. So it's not a short 10-year power plant. This is 25 years of 60 megawatts that the county will have. Or we can scale up from that accordingly. Locally derived clean energy is something that we see as a value and that we hope you guys do too. And hence why we selected this area and are speaking today. This slide that you see right here is really the focus on it is that it's significantly small footprints. Because we don't bring water back to surface in our process and just vapor, we condense vapor and reuse it. So we recycle all of the vapor that we use in the plant history. Okay, that's important to know because it's a minimal footprint at surface. So it's not big and a big eyesore like some plants could be. We also have a plant design, and if it's your preference, that's probably where we would go, is a plant design that allows us not to release any kind of vapor to the atmosphere. So a lot of geothermal plants, you might see vapor plumes, and there can be eyesores, and where we'd be located, we probably don't want to do that on the base of Mount Hood. So we can go ahead and change that in our plant design to do that. It might mean that we produce 4 or 5 megawatts less, but that's okay. We have encompass some of the environmental as well as the visual sensitivities that the community may have. So what you see in this slide here is just an example of conventional geothermal. You take 35 wells to produce 60 megawatts versus 3 wells and 60 in our case. Different type of resources. They need hot rock, permeable rock, and abundant water to utilize those type of systems. And the plant that I described to you uses 0 water. Now we have an injection process that uses water, but the plant itself uses 0 water, which is huge. That's like over 100 million cubic feet of water that you save, 180 million to be exact, in that plant design. So scalable, as I stated, and so this concept page is really it's a concept page. You got the GeoX little plant out in the field. We feed to the end users, towns, villages, end users. It could be agricultural, could be any type of end use agreement that we then develop. Typically, the geothermal, as I said, it to date is about 3 megawatts on a current given well structure. So all of our system, biggest unique aspect is when we pump the water into the wells, it flashes 100% because of that heat. Okay, because of that heat, it flashes to supercritical vapor, and we bring that back to surface direct to a turbine. It doesn't go to a flash separator. So if you're thinking a conventional geothermal plant, it has a flash separator. It might have 3 flash separators and 3 different turbines. So its footprint is larger. We don't have that style of footprint. So again, looking at it this way, it's the important part of this concept is what you see in these as you go deeper and they take off as multilaterals is these 3 wells. The center well in each of those 3 layers is where the water is injected, and you're producing steam to the outside wells. Now you can put those all together like this in a row, or we'd swing it out and go the other direction and do the same thing with scaling up how much power we want. So the length of that and the spacing of those wells help define the longevity of the project. I was probably talking too much there, but sorry. Again, so the big things for us are identifying the key stakeholders, the permitting agencies, people to assist us with this process, seek guidance on permits from the county and state regulatory agencies, Department of Geology and Mineral Industries, and Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. We've already started communicating with the Department of Geology and Mineral Industries to date. Permit to drill the temperature gradient wells, and the temperature gradient wells, they could be anywhere from 2 up to 6 wells. And when I say 2, it really depends on what we're going to see for geothermal gradients. So if we're unsuccessful on 2 wells, then we might say that the project doesn't look promising to find the heat at any kind of depths like I described earlier. But like I said, right now, we want to do some geophysical work. We want to do some of this appraisal work with the wells to try to assess whether we have the right conditions to do the project. Perform environmental impact analysis. We've already contacted environmental people on that because we obviously have to work through that in terms of our processes. Submit geothermal permitting application to the Oregon Department of Geology, Mineral, Land, and Regulation and Reclamation Office, and pursue other studies and permits as identified in the stakeholders outreach. That's an introduction only. Any questions?
Go ahead.
Yeah, so can you talk a little bit more about water and how the water plays it? So you're injecting water, it's flashing, and then
Yes.
are you recondensing, and is it a
That's
closed loop
correct.
system?
That's correct. For the first 7 years to 8 years, we don't take a drop of water. We're reusing it. In the last 13 to 12 years, we're using somewhere in the range of probably less than 500 barrels a day in terms of water usage on the project. So obviously we'd have to source some water. Now, whether it be surface or whether it be well water or other systems. That being said, you have to know that the water we're placing back in and re-injecting, we're purifying. We're purifying it to roughly about a 700 ppm quality of fresh water, drinking water. And why is that the case? Because that's what we want for that reservoir. So it's clean, there's no scale buildup or anything like that. So we will have our own water purification capability at surface. So that would be something that we need to explore as to possible water sources and how we look at that. It's a time sensitive thing. You know, you've got literally a phase where you've got 8 years where there is no water because you're reusing it. And then eventually it plays out in the process.
Thank you.
Sure.
So to date, you have no working plants yet, if I'm
Right.
reading this correctly, but you have how many in process?
In process, in terms of process, we have, how many land holdings do we have right now?
That's 17 prospects.
Okay.
17, yeah. And we have another project potential that we're currently working in the south right now in Mexico. It's an existing power plant, but they don't have the complete production. In other words, they're producing significantly below capacity. So they're looking to say, how can you guys change the output of this? Because it's a hard rock that doesn't allow them to create the steam. So they're looking at our process for that, in addition to prospects that we're trying to really develop here in the US.
And how long does it take to go through this process of going from identifying a site to actually having a functioning plant?
It can take up to 3 years, and it really depends on local permitting and licensing. I mean, our biggest thing is to get as soon as we could, you know, in an ideal sense, and that's probably just the way I work. You know, this fall, this winter, we'd be drilling the appraisal wells, because once we know they're there, that sets up the rest of the work that needs to go on for it. So you can customize the plant design for this area. Right now, I have 3 different plant designs that we have. We've got a water cooled system, we've got a binary system that's bottom cooled, as I just described to you, and then we have a water tower cooling system. Again, those are more water intensive, so I wouldn't propose that for you.
And what sort of sites do you focus on? Are they all like around volcanoes or?
Well, they have to be near the heat source.
Right. So you need
Right
shallow
now, globally speaking, we're looking at anywhere between probably the lowest, shallowest depth is 12,000 feet. And the deepest is probably 26,000 feet in a vertical sense, okay? And then we go horizontally. Okay, so we're going horizontally almost 2 miles. Those on the schematic there, those are.
Oh, it's
almost
2 miles long. Okay. Thank you.
There's an additional page here. Is this something you're still going to talk to us about?
That's a plant sketch, a layout. We had a request previously about what was the size, what could the size or the impact look like. that is an example of one of the sizing variables we have. I'd have to look at it more closer to see if we can scale that down.
So this one is like 500 feet, it looks like, I mean, the numbers, but about 500 feet.
Yeah, that's about right. So the drilling sites, so the local sites for this triplet, it's gonna be a small pad, relatively speaking. It's gonna be about 150 feet by about 200 feet only. And we do all the work on that. Okay, and then we'll scale up the pad right over it. That's where the plant is.
Right. So the entire area that this affects is limited by this boundary on
That's
this
right.
drawing.
And the only thing that is more extensive than that is our exploration wells, because you saw that rectangle in the area. We're based on our geophysicist, and if Alan was here, he's back in France on holidays. But we're gonna put wells roughly in the corners, okay? So we can see what geothermal gradient goes down, and then based on those wells at depth of whether it's 3,000 feet, is the shallow wells, or it could be 6,000 or 8,000 feet for the deep wells as a confirm. That's the deep well is to confirm we have it, okay? And when we have that, then it triggers the plant.
Right.
So that's why I say it could be 2 to 6 wells, you know, in a bad case scenario for us, because we don't see the heat, it's 2. And they're slim wells. They're very small. They're 6-inch hole as far as diameter goes.
That's a very small pad as well.
Yes.
The request that you referred to earlier could have been from me. I was looking for a schematic or something of the above ground facility, and what
Okay.
it looked like as far as height and
Oh, okay.
just
Yeah,
appearance.
we can get you more information on height and what it would look like a 3D scheme.
That'd be great.
Sure.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
So these early wells that you're looking at first, how much area is that going to take?
They're basically about 100 feet by 120 feet areas. And what we'll do with all of those, because we're going with a non-disturbance focus, is that everything with the rig, because the rig has diesel on it, we will put a barrier between the soil and the base material on construction. And that impermeable barrier is so that we can catch any kind of dripping from diesel or any kind of a truck rolls on location and it's dripping. So we don't want any of that left there. So that's going to be scooped up and hauled away as hazardous waste.
And what about groundwater? You're targeting something far below the groundwater,
Yes.
but you're passing through
Yes.
on the way.
We could assess on the way down through, we'll have the ability to provide feedback as to where groundwater exists, because we'll be logging that.
But what about potential contamination or
No, we'll
damage?
be casing all of that off with casing and cementing technologies, so that it'll be, in fact, we'll do that, and then we run a casing cement bond log to verify that the bond is in fact good. Otherwise, we got to do a remedial and fix that.
Because it wouldn't work for you if it wasn't a perfect casing, your entire system wouldn't work, right?
That's right. Yeah, those other wells that I described, though, are still going to be used by us going forwards. If the heat is there, we'll convert those wells into monitoring wells. So for the life of the project, we'll be able to monitor microseismicity, you know, in the area. So if anybody says, well, you know, I felt a 1 Richter scale tremor, we're going to be able to have the validation of that from these multiple wells.
That was going to be my next question, whether you could possibly be triggering any, given that you're removing heat from the ground, whether you could be triggering any other events.
So what's important about that is that, so in our assessment right now, and I can't say this definitively, I'm going to talk about similar properties, is usually the granite is in around 11 or 12,000 feet. And then we're 3,000 to 4,000 feet into that. So you're into a 50, 80,000 compressive strength granite. It's hard. It doesn't want to go ahead and compact. So you're not going to have subsidence, for example, from a surface perspective. You're not going to have changes in that scenario. The other thing is that, from sort of West Texas is a good example. It's been plagued, and you guys have all heard about it, with all these microseismic events. Majority of that event is because they're constantly injecting water into a resource that's water filled, and you have to expand it, right? It's pushing against pressure, and it has to keep moving, and it has to keep doing that. And then as it keeps doing that, it's triggering a geomechanics response, and that is tremor. In our situation, when we're pumping water into there, that water doesn't go into a pressurized system. In fact, at the reservoir, it's only 4,500 PSI. And then as it moves out, it flashes to steam. So you're never against a non-compressible medium. That's the point.
But you are cooling it.
You're not cooling it in the reservoir, you're flashing it in the reservoir. The water is going in at, say, 125 degrees.
No, sorry, the granite is cooling.
Your granite is cooling over
Right,
time,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But we have some different ways to manage the cooling effect by how we inject the fluid and the temperature.
And there will be some city wells that will be available online for the public to look at any moment in time.
Yeah, the goal is to have a public website so that anybody can go look at these monitoring wells to see what's there. So first of all, these would be, assuming we're successful in the exploration phase, we'd set up monitoring immediately on those. So we have 6 months, 8 months of time showing you what's happening in the area before we ever do anything with the subsurface construction.
Question?
In terms of connecting to transmission, I'm assuming you would have to build some transmission to tie in. I mean, those
Yes.
are the lines you're looking at, I'm sure BPA's lines, which you can't just tie into. You've got to have a sub. And
Right.
go through. So how distance how far can you be from that transmission?
We're approximately where we put our lines, a couple miles.
Yeah, not even that. It just depends where we actually locate, but within a mile or two.
So above ground or below ground transmission to connect?
We can do either or. I mean, if you guys and the council felt that it was really something that you wanted to have buried, then we could bury it.
Thanks more. There's actually a bill that has a lot of fire risk issues
Sure.
and concerns.
Right.
So defensible space around structures and all those things. So adding above ground transmissions a little dicey. Yeah.
I thought BPA is going to be replacing all of those lines. Isn't there a plan where they're working on replacing all those lines over the next couple of years? All the
Still-
transmission lines?
Still above ground.
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
But to your point, it's a high concern.
Oh, one more. You referred to indirect labor. What, does this facility somewhat self-operable or are there on-site staff?
There's going to be on-site staff, and there's going to be a lot of automation too.
Okay.
So one of the things that we're also focused with this design is that some other plants don't do it today, but because we're producing so much direct heat, we're actually taking what we call waste heat and converting it to electricity on site, which will power the plant. So we're not taking away from the base power that the plant produces. We're taking that waste heat that comes off the piping. And that piping heat will be used that, but back to your question, there'll be a control council to obviously have to link with the town with regards to emergency response in terms of fire. We'll have our own security to a large degree, but again, you're going to have to rely on the local police force and so forth to support that. Like we would do with any other scenario.
Thank you. More.
Well, I want to thank you too for coming in today. I know we had only a short period of time for you to give a presentation that probably could have gone on for hours, but it's been very interesting. We're very interested. And we will be working with this process and with Doug and whatnot. Anything else you need to add, Doug?
Well, just real briefly, if you want us to move forward, at least looking at this project and see if something could be developed, basically the staff would work with them, continue to work with them, just additional research. Maybe there's questions that you have or want us to follow up with. We need to follow up on those things, and then potentially get it ready to present it as a project with you commissioners for a hearing. And so once we do that hearing, and basically the purpose is to determine if it's in our best interest to do this project. So that's upfront, it's a public meeting. And then also, so after that happens, and if you choose to go forward that it is in the best interest, then we need to advertise that we would want to advertise for someone to do a temporary prospecting well system. And I don't know if this would be the only entity or not, but there could be more than one. We don't know, but we do have to advertise for that. That would be a temporary system, but then we can move forward once we select the winning proposal on that. We could move forward probably with a temporary type lease to do this. But if approved, then we could move forward right away with negotiation with the entity and continue to develop that project and actually negotiate a longer lease. So it's basically about 5 steps there, but that's kind of what that would look like moving forward. So there's still some process. There's some major decisions to be made down the road. And so today isn't that. It's just
I assume today you need to know if we as a board are willing to move forward at this point.
Yeah, should the forestry department and Hood River County move forward with looking at this type of geothermal project? And I mean, is that something you want to look at? It could have substantial monetary benefits, but also, you know, they brought forward in their presentation also some other benefits as well. It is green energy. There are concerns.
Anybody against moving forward?
So it wasn't stated explicitly, you're talking about doing this on county land, in county forest.
On county forest
Right, so
specifically.
it'd be leasing of county forest, or
Excuse me?
it would be leasing of county forest, or what would the
Yes,
arrangement be?
yes, for the ability to drill.
Right.
And as they described, there would be a small footprint of the area that we're looking at. One of the parcels is about 1,600 acres roughly on the surface, but they wouldn't be using 1,600 acres. It's, you know, probably less than 10 acres roughly. So, you know, less than 1% or even closer to 0.5% or less is what would actually be the footprint on the ground. So, you know, relative to forest operations, and this area is also pretty well controlled for access. We don't have a lot of public access in this area. It's a lot of gated system there, this particular area. So that's probably good in this case. But you know, there could be other concerns that we kind of go through and we uncover that we need to figure out. But you know, on the surface, it seems like a viable project where we can still practice forest management and potentially develop geothermal.
And you're talking about the plant itself would be owned, is not owned by us. We're leasing the location where the plant is built and operated.
We're leasing those rights to be able to tap that resource.
And if the plant were to go into production, the county would have a royalty.
And that's where, you know, the majority of the revenue comes way during the time of operation.
Okay, Doug, I'm running out of time here, so I'm gonna let you guys go, and you've got your marching orders. Continue and look into this, and if we have more questions, make sure
We're
we
going to
get.
talk about this more later in the meeting, right?
It's not on the list, but we could. Yeah.
I'd like to, because I need to think about it for a few minutes between.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can't make
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to say that.
Okay, next up for our work session is measure 109, psilocybin services. Eric.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioners. As you're probably aware, Measure 109 was passed by Oregon voters in November of 2020, and it legalized the manufacture, sale, and use of psilocybin, which is